Welcome to the Phillip Wylie Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Phillip Wylie.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phillip Wylie Show. I'm excited to have Lesley Carhart joining me today. Lesley and I have been connected through social media for several years in the cybersecurity community, and I believe we met for the first time at DerbyCon. Was the first time that we met.
Sounds about right. That's when everybody pretty much met anybody at the time. It was DerbyCon or ShmooCon.
Yeah, that was pretty. I'm glad I at least got to go to the last two. I had a ticket to ShmooCon, but I wasn't ready to travel yet because I did quite a bit of travel. Fourth quarter last year, managed to get a ticket, but I just did not feel like traveling.
It was wild this year. I think there was probably quadruple the number of people who were actually allowed in the conference. It was quite insane. Yeah.
Probably a lot more people doing LobbyCon too, I'd imagine, since it's the last one.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. It was people descended on the hotel, and I'm not going to say there was badge swapping going on, but there was probably quite a lot of badge swapping going on. So people go do their little pilgrimage into the con, then come out.
My ticket made it good hands because a friend of mine, Stephanie Lewis, that runs Sec 202 in the DC area, she was going and she had messaged me to see if I was going and saying she's looking for a ticket, and I was looking for someone to give the ticket to, so it worked out well. So she lives in the area. So I saw that you had some difficulties because of the weather and stuff trying to get in.
No, that was the year before. That was the big storm that delayed everybody. This year was pretty good. I got delayed a little bit, but it was just a normal airline. The plane broke, had to get a different plane kind of stuff.
That stuff is just too common anymore, isn't it?
Yeah.
So whenever I have my guests on the show, I always ask them to have them share their hacker origin story, how they started out, up until what they're doing today. So if you wouldn't mind sharing your hacker origin story.
Yeah. So I had one of these prototypical entries into the world of hacking that was not actually prototypical. You know, it's one of those ones that you hear from everybody. So I always tell people I don't really like talking about it because then young people think they have to have a similar route. And I grew up in a farm in the 90s and pretty much very isolated from everybody. When I was 7, 8 years old, my dad bought at the time, it was a Windows 2.1 computer, DOS computer, to do inventory in the farm. And it was like a lease. It was like $7,000 and we didn't have a lot of money. And yeah, I had two choices at that point as a young kid. It was I could go work on the farm or I could work on the computer. And you can see from my complexion, I don't do well with the sunshine. So I spent plenty of time outside as a kid, but I find that I really enjoyed learning about the computer, and I learned how to program as a young kid then and started writing my own games and things. And when I was 15 years old, I was one of the few people who could program outside of like HTML, and I got hired on as a back-end web developer, SQL developer at 15 during the dot-com boom, because things were insane then. Because you could get a job as a software person at 15 years old because they were so desperate for people to build e-commerce platforms. I did that for a while, and then, of course, the dot-com bubble burst. And, you know, as a wanton kid who had not done too well in school and had been too smart to enjoy anything, there weren't a lot of options for me, so I ended up joining the military. And I was in the recruiter's office. They were like, well, do you want to be an admin? Do you want to be a physician's assistant? And I'm like, oh, yeah, stuff. What do you got with computers? And at the time, like, nothing. But, there are other types of computers out there. So they were like, do you want to work on airplane computers? I was like, sure, that sounds fun. So I became a back shop avionics technician, the person who people would send the broken aircraft computer and digital devices to solder back together, look at the pages and pages of wiring diagrams and put them back together. And that was fun. It wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It was interesting. I'm glad I had that experience and I learned a lot about aviation. But what I really loved was computer hacking and computer forensics. That was my hobby and interest in the 90s when next to nobody knew about it. Somebody got pissed at me at LinkedIn for doing a talk like this and saying there was really no jobs in schooling in computer forensics in the 90s. There really wasn't. Like 10 of you. There was like 10 of you. There was like one degree program and there was like one class in it. There was one book in it. I had the damn book. There's really no jobs in computer forensics back then unless you work for a police department or a couple of firms. And so it really wasn't attainable. And I tried to really navigate my way into the cybersecurity community. And at the time, I did not look like what people wanted a computer hacker to look like, period. End of story. I had been programming since I was 7. I got my first job on computers at 15. I was a hobbyist. I had my own computers. I built my own computers. I was more than qualified to be a part of hacker groups, cybersecurity, things like that as a young professional adult, especially once I got a degree in aviation, electronics, and network engineering. But it didn't help my case. Nobody would take me on as a mentee. Nobody wanted me to be part of their clique. It was really gatekeepy back then. And I had to be one of those people who pushed and shoved my way in, and it took a really long time for me to make it into cybersecurity from other stuff. Eventually I did. Somebody gave me a shot, and that was really, really important. Once you have the work experience and you can start building on it and get certifications, it becomes much easier, but it was a different time. I hope we don't end up back there. I've been gratified during my 25-year career now, I guess, to see a much more diverse workforce in cybersecurity and in IT in general, but especially in our hackery field. It's been wonderful. As we have more senior people who don't all look the same and come from different backgrounds, it's enabled us to bring in more young people who also don't all look the same and come from different backgrounds. But that's my story into the field. It's been a grand adventure. I've tried to live my life through a series of adventures, and I've done a lot of things.
Yeah, one thing before I forget, I want to mention and thank you again because you gave me my first opportunity to keynote at Pancakes Con.
Oh, really? That was the very first one?
That was my very first keynote.
No kidding.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you were so accomplished at that point that it was
Thank you.
an obvious choice. That's wonderful. That makes me so
Well,
happy.
it was great coming from one of my favorite cybersecurity folks too to get invited to keynote. So that was a huge honor.
That makes me so happy. Gosh.
So kind of what got you into ICS and OT forensics?
I've always been in this non-standard computers that don't look like computers people are used to fields. I mean, from being in avionics to working in network engineering to working on electronics. I did that in the military too. I worked in various types of electronic devices, and they're all computers. They're all computers, and a lot of them do really important things. But people tend to think of computers as the laptop or desktop on their desk and at work or at home. And sometimes they think about maybe their mobile phone being a computer or a tablet being a computer. But people don't think about all these other things that are keeping society running that are computers too, and they can be impacted by all the things that impact computers. So yeah, I mean, just like having that kind of background, thinking about those non-standard devices pushes you, the weird backgrounds like that are what push you into industrial cybersecurity.
Yeah, very cool. So I'm sure you see some really neat stuff. And I had a brief period of time where I worked for a company that had an ICS environment. I used to work for a consumer product manufacturing company, and we had some ICS environments. And I know it's really hard to get to do anything security wise in those environments because those systems are so easy to mess up.
It's a very interesting space to work in for a lot of reasons. We could spend a whole hour just talking about the differences between IT and OT. Every area of cybersecurity, from pen testing, red teaming to blue team, incident response detection, is different in OT because of some key things. First of all, everything comes down to life and safety and consequences. Like, you can't just shut things down because somebody could die. Or if you shut down manufacturing too long, it could break your equipment, or it could just cost you so much money you can't stay in business. So everything has to be done with that eye to, life safety process, keeping functioning safely. And then you also have a lot of really old stuff. And you have really old stuff because life safety consequence, when you buy your system, it's warranted to work in a certain state of devices, configurations, operating systems. You can't just go replace things. It's been vetted for years of testing with the OEM, with the manufacturer of the system. You can't just upgrade an operating system. It could make something fail in unpredictable ways. And they're warranted and designed to work in a state for a long time before there's an upgrade window. So you have really old stuff doing really important things in an environment where you can't shut things down. You can't do a lot of active scanning. You have to do things very passively. You can't always install clients or agents. And you have all these low-level devices you have to work around and secure too. So very different area of cybersecurity, very important, very challenging, and only growing.
Yeah. So how difficult is it to get training in ICS and OT for someone who wants to work in those areas, regardless of what security discipline?
That's a very good question. There's formal training now available in industrial cybersecurity through a few different universities, as well as SANS Institute, CISA, Idaho National Labs, et cetera. And there's international stuff as well. It's pretty rare though still. So some of it typically is self-study. Usually the people who get into this, I say we have weird backgrounds, but it's usually somebody who's either coming from an industrial engineering background who chooses to have a hobby in cybersecurity, or vice versa. It's somebody in cybersecurity who has some weird exposure or hobby that involves industrial devices. And it's not just something, I see people interpret it wrong. A lot of people, when they're trying to break into this, they really focus on, I'm going to hack industrial devices. I'm going to get some PLCs, or I'm going to find them on Shodan, and I'm going to hack them. And that's going to make me know about industrial cybersecurity. You get a PLC, it is a very simple computer, like think 1980s, like very simple logic on it. No encryption in the protocols. You tell it to stop, it's going to stop. That's what it does. Like it has to work. It has to work. It has to be simple to keep people safe and keep operating reliably for decades. So yeah, you can hack it. I'm not shocked. You can hack it. The problem with security in those environments is the whole process. The whole process of doing whatever, canning tuna, getting an airplane off the grounds, making the lights change to the right color on the street, generating electricity, making water come out of the pipes in your building, whatever it is, the whole process is a thing that can't be impacted. So when you're thinking about attacking, being a red teamer, doing offensive cybersecurity in those environments, you're always thinking about how can I make a bad thing happen? Not just to one device, because there's redundancies, there's safety controls, there's human operators. They're made to not break because people die. And you're thinking about how can I evade all those controls and make a specific bad thing happen? So much more complicated and focused on the whole process. The whole process as it works together with all its moving parts. All the different devices, high and low level, the PLCs and the computers involved. If you're defending, you have to think about the same thing. What is the worst day ever? How does my whole process fit together? And how could somebody potentially cause that worst day? It's usually not just, they send a stop command to one PLC or they change one setting. There's usually a bunch of controls to prevent a bad thing from happening. And there's, again, redundant devices, things like that. There's supervisory devices monitoring those devices, et cetera. And there's physical safety controls as well. So you're thinking about how could, again, somebody evade all those controls and cause a bad thing to happen, a specific bad thing we really care about. So that's what you have to learn. That is a thing on top of cybersecurity that you need is really good process knowledge. If you want to get into this field and you can't afford a training class, or, you watched the existing online training, the stuff that's out there, learn a process. I don't care what process, whatever you have access to, wherever your parents work or your spouse works, or, you have a friend who will let you job shadow, or whatever your business does on the industrial sites. Shadow it for a while and learn at a high level. You don't have to become an electrical or chemical engineer. Learn to ask the right questions about how the process works and what could break it. And that's how you get good at cybersecurity. You learn what you can't do in cybersecurity because it'll break things. And you'll learn what you have to protect against because a bad person could break those things.
So how hard is it to get training in digital forensics for industrial controls?
There's none. I teach like the one class on that, and it's pretty high level class. There's a few different courses in the SANS ICS space. They're all wonderful classes. Not that I'm biased or anything, but I teach the incident response course that's ICS 515. There's a couple more advanced courses in ICS, but they're not completely forensics focused. So the SANS curriculum is wonderful and it'll give you a good start in forensics, but there's just not a lot of dedicated forensic tools or courses in industrial forensics, especially on low-level devices. It's a big space. There's a lot of research that needs to be done in it. And we will always be seeing new weird configurations and devices.
So how difficult is it to get into that area of security?
There's plenty of jobs. Again, once you know processes, once you know about industrial networks and how they're laid out, and you understand one, you can learn other ones. They're all kind of in a similar model, except they're all completely different in terms of technologies, ages, and protocols and vendors and stuff. But once you know how to understand a process, you can understand processes. Forensics, it requires a lot of creativity in those environments. It involves thinking outside the box, and it involves having like ability to work with lower level devices that aren't Windows or they're very old. And you can do all that stuff. It's not rocket science. We're not doing rocket surgery here. Like, if you're a good forensics person, you should be able to do bit for bit analysis of firmware on a non-standard device. We've become very reliant on things like automated tools and EDR, and you just don't get those. You don't get those in ICS very much. You have to be able to do old school forensics. You have to be able to pull out drives. You have to be able to build cables to interface with devices that have non-familiar firmware. That's the job. You have to be able to think outside the box and use old school understanding of how computers work to do forensics.
Yeah. So on the topic, we're talking before the show. So what are some interesting stories that you've seen in some of your investigations?
You want me to tell the Moth story? God. Okay. All right.
Yes.
I'll tell this story. I know everybody loves this story. So it's not really I've worked plenty of real cases in ICS. Like, it's interesting, the sources of weird things that happen in industrial environments. I get called in for some things that are surefire hacking or insiders. And then I get called in because something breaks and nobody can figure out what broke it. And it's like, is it a cyber thing? We've eliminated everything. Is somebody hacking us? And sometimes people get very nervous about it. And this was one of those cases. I got a phone call at like 9:00 at night from one of my customers, and I do retainer services, of course, at Dragos. And they were like, you need to get in your car and drive here right now because somebody's hacking us. China's hacking us. I'm like, stop. Tell me what's going on. Stop. Tell me what's going on. Well, we've got a peaker plant. Peaker plants are the power plants that you turn on when you have a lot more demand. So usually during the summertime when people turn on their air conditioners. And our peaker plant just turned itself on. It's February in the United States, in winter, in a place where there's winter. So that's completely weird. The power plant should just be off with a skeleton crew all winter. Okay, yeah, that's weird. And what have you done? Well, we've had the vendor out. They've looked at everything. They can't find anything wrong with it. Okay, well, that's really strange. I can't think of off the top of my head a reason specifically why a state would target you. I mean, they do test bed attacks, but that's kind of a way to blow your cover by making a power plant turn on. So that doesn't make a lot of rational threat intelligence space, but I'm in my car, I'm going. Yeah, that's wild and wacky. I got my tools, I'm coming. So I drive all night. And while I'm driving, I talk to the specialist on that specific architecture, that specific process at Dragos. And I talked to my peers and they're like, this might be the big one because like this system is complex. It requires a pretty detailed startup sequence. You go to the control panel, the digital control panel for this device. You have to hit a series of like 12 buttons to turn it on. It's not just like, oh, I accidentally clicked the wrong button. So, okay. Yeah, it's really weird. I'm like, I'm on my way. I'm going. So I get to the power plant with my tools and very tired, me and a cup of coffee. I go in there, and in the control center, there's 3 people. There's the 2 skeleton crew operators, engineers who work there, and the security person. And they are like swearing up and down it was neither of them. They were looking at each other, having a chat, talking about a TV show. It wasn't them. They heard it go on. They didn't do anything. It wasn't them. The security guards checked like every remote access device, every camera. It wasn't anybody accessing the facility. It's remote anyway, in the middle of a snowy, cold, remote landscape. Nobody's been in or out. Okay. So I start doing forensics. I look at their computers, which are the only ones on in that building. I tear them to pieces for hours, do detailed forensics in them, and there's nothing wrong with them. There's no malware scheduled. It's nothing weird, no keyloggers, perfectly pristine computers. And they are actually in an air-gapped network. They don't have internet connectivity there. I validate that at the switch. Like, this is stunning. We almost never see air gapping anymore. Like, everything's connected to something. They get a phone call and get told to turn on the power plant. So that vector for even like remote control of the plant is out. And I'm like, okay, where else can you turn the power plant on? Because it went on. So you can go out to the actual unit and hit levers, hit buttons, but that's under a camera. Nobody's done that. Vendor's been out and troubleshot it all. And then there's one more computer. It's out by the actual unit. It's in a shed next to it. Okay, I'm like, take me to your leader. So let's go out there. And so we go out to this little Home Depot outdoor shed by the actual utility and the generator. And we go in there. They take the padlock off. Inside, there's 2 racks of equipment. The one is all the PLCs and stuff. They've already been checked out by the vendor. The other one is a rack-mounted server. One of those ones with the pull-out keyboard, mouse, touchscreen that's mounted into the rack. And he's like, "This is where China hacked us." I'm like, okay, explain what's going on. Show me. And on the screen, it's a always logged in Windows computer. It's like the ones that the operators use in their office. Everything is open in Windows. Everything is open. Notepads open, calculators open, command prompts open. Everything in Windows is open on this computer, as well as the HMI application. I'm like, this isn't the movie Hackers. Like, nobody would do this. An adversary, again, there's no reason for an adversary to do this. This is goofy. And I'm like, okay, well, let's still do the forensic analysis thing. So I tear apart the computer, and there is nothing wrong with it. Nobody's even logged into it for months since there was an update until that morning when they were troubleshooting it. Again, the network's air gap. There's no wireless. I even do a wireless assessment. I check for antennas. Like, I check everything, and there's nothing wrong with the computer. And I'm like, well, something made all this stuff happen on the computer. So all that's left is like random input. So I look at how long like those windows were open, and they were all open for like 10 seconds. And again, this is not the movie Hackers. That doesn't make any sense. So something's clicking buttons here. Something's clicking on stuff on the desktop. And I'm like, well, what could do that? And there's a keyboard and a mouse and a touchscreen. So I call my coworker back at Dragos. I'm like, go to Best Buy, go buy 5 of these keyboards and mice and stick them in like some water, stick them in your freezer, in your refrigerator, see if you can get them to do random input. And he does. While I'm doing forensics, he does that. And they do some random stuff, but that model just doesn't do what we're looking for. And then I'm left with a touchscreen. And I pull a hair off my head and I touch it, and it's incredibly sensitive. But there's really no utilities, like it's from some random cheapo touchscreen vendor. There's no utilities for testing it. I'm like, something's hitting this touchscreen. It's always on. It's bright. It never logs out. And it's a bright screen in a dark shed outside. And I come from the Midwest. I grew up on a farm. I know what that means. Bright light in a shed outside. Stuff's going to land on it. Bugs get attracted to that. And there's other critters and things out in these outside. But how do I prove that? So I'm like, I'm out of ideas. So make paint big. Make paint big on this screen. Make it the top screen and leave it overnight. And they're like, but China's hacking us. I'm like, China's not hacking you. Like, I've checked everything. Make paint big and take a picture and text it to me in the morning. And sure enough, the next morning, I get a text message. I get an SMS from the guy. And there's little whirligigs on this stupid touchscreen. So, I mean, I don't have a game camera. Like, the logical assumption that I'm making too. It's not a huge leap given the evidence and all the hours of forensic investigation I did there. Is there's stuff like landing on the bright screen at night, probably for years. And that was the night. It just happened to hit the right buttons on this stupid touchscreen to start the peaker plant. And that's the kind of weird investigations you do in industrial cybersecurity.
That's pretty funny. That's interesting. Just the coincidence and just the finally hitting the right buttons to get that to turn on the plants. It's pretty amazing.
I mean, I don't know if it was a Moth or it was something heavy enough to interact with the touchscreen, but that could be a lot of larger bugs. I don't know. Again, I don't have a game camera, but we're just going to go with the Moth story because that's probably the most likely thing for a bright screen outside in the Midwest. But yeah, real weird.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing story. Very interesting because every time you think you see these, especially, I don't know, I guess it depends on the exposure people have had to that or how new they are, what they think it is. That's kind of like one time I worked at this mortgage company and we had this third-party vendor that created one of our applications for flood insurance. And the vendor had noticed someone had downloaded their code or something and all this. And we're thinking, this one guy at work was one of the developers interacting with them. So after he was gone at work, we went and checked out his computer looking for anything. And later on brought him in to question him. He just downloaded the code to reverse engineer it. So it was nothing malicious. So many times people think it's malicious and it ends up being nothing.
It's like the Illinois water treatment plant that they thought was being hacked by Russia, but it was the engineer on vacation in Russia fixing something like that. They got called into the CISA and DHS and stuff and made the news before they figured out it was just the authorized technician was on vacation seeing his family in Russia. But yeah, I mean, these environments are weird. They're less documented. People aren't comfortable working in them, and they're very ambiguous in terms of things that we aren't familiar with in terms of protocols and devices. So people don't understand what's happening to them as well, and it makes it very hard to do cybersecurity. And that also includes detecting real bad things that are happening, which, I mean, I do this as a full-time job. A lot of really bad things are happening in these environments.
So just to kind of change topics a little bit, I know you're a big advocate of community. You run your own online conference. You're always volunteering and speaking and stuff. So just kind of wanted you to share your thoughts with our listeners on the importance of community and how it can help them in their careers.
Look, the job market isn't great right now. I guess I hope that's not a shock to anybody. Like, it's better in cybersecurity than it is in like software engineering, but things are tough right now, especially for lower level people. As senior people, we really need to recognize that and try to lift up the next generation behind us, not just like pull the ladder up behind us. This is the time for us to be doing outreach to young people and career transitioners, wherever they're coming from. This is the time everybody who's comfortable in their position, we should be taking on a mentee. They should be doing something for the community because people did stuff for them or they didn't, like in my case, and we should make it better. We should make the world better. I know that's a controversial thing right now, but we should be trying to make the world a little better than when we came into it. But either way, as senior people, we should all be trying to build a more welcoming community for the young, scared people who are excited about getting into this field at a time where there's not as many job opportunities for junior people as there used to be. And for junior people, it's vital to find connections and network, be a part of the community because it is more competitive out there. It is tougher than it used to be. So that is a vital element to being successful. You have to do all the other stuff. You have to do the certifications or the training or the degree, whatever you choose to do, the self-study. You have to find a way to educate yourself in cybersecurity. But then another element of that is being a good participant in the community, finding mentorship and networking with hiring officials to have a better shot at a job.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I really love what you're saying about us as the more senior folks need to help people out. And one of the things I have to say too is for anyone that does that, you'll be rewarded beyond your belief of the feeling it is to be able to help these people out.
Yeah, it's wonderful when I have people come up to me who I mentored 10 years ago and they're like, I'm a director now. That's wonderful. Thanks for telling me. This is very exciting. Like, it happens sometimes. Or like people who got a job for 5 years ago and it was their first job in cybersecurity. And sometimes people come up to me and tell me that. And it's wonderful. It makes me so happy. I might not recognize them. I've mentored a lot of people over the years, especially like at conferences and things, but it's wonderful when people come up to me and tell me about that. It makes me so happy.
Yeah, one of my coolest experiences, I used to teach pen testing at Dallas College. And one time I had two women who were former students working on a pen test for me because we outsourced our web app pen testing. And it was kind of cool to see emails from two of my former students. One was from my very first class. She was probably early 50s or so. And just to see these emails, and it's just really kind of cool to see their dreams come true and see them out there, in their desired career field.
And that only benefits us as an industry.
Yes.
So really, I would challenge listeners who are more senior, do something. At least take on one mentee, who's outside of your company. So somebody who's trying to get into the field or break into the field, et cetera. And if you can, do something else, like do some kind of community contribution to a conference or something. We are as strong as our community is. That's been true throughout time for various subcultures, I guess you could call us, the hacker subculture. We are as strong as our contributions to one another and to being a healthy subculture and healthy professional community. It's up to us. Nobody else is going to do that. As I get older, I hope other people take up that banner.
Yeah, and it's so many times that aspiring professionals don't get that exposure or those recommendations in it from a college university setting because
They're trying to sell
they
a
don't,
degree. Yeah.
yeah. And some of them hadn't worked in the field, so they really don't understand what it's like. So yeah, it's definitely
And
important.
I get the same questions. I've done a talk at a couple conferences that people have really, really liked. You can see it under Blue Team Con or Christchurch Hacking Con. I did it at Wild West Hacking Fest. I don't normally repeat talks, but this one's been a really important one on things that people all think are only happening to them that I learned in mentorship. So I talk about the 10 things that I hear I spend my Sundays doing online mentorship. Every Sunday, I hear the same problems over and over again, and nobody wants to talk to anybody else. They're too embarrassed. They think it's just them, but it's like the same problems over and over again. And they're easy ones for like senior cybersecurity people to solve for people. Like, what niche do I get into? What training do I need for that niche? Is this a good prospective job for me? What are the downsides? Like these, and then there's the people who are in horrible, toxic work environments who are afraid to talk to anybody and think it's normal, and they're like, is it normal that they're having me work 90 hours a week without giving me a pay raise? They just need to hear it from somebody on the outside. So mentorship can be so valuable. Like, it's people who have problems that they're suffering through alone, and you can just make such a huge difference in their life.
So we're getting down towards the end of the episode. Is there anything you'd like to share before we close it out?
Gosh, you've asked such good questions. Is there anything else that I could inform people of that would be useful to them? That was a question to you.
Yeah, I really can't think of anything. I usually ask these questions at the end of the show. That way, in case there's something my guest wanted to discuss, that they get the chance to do that or share.
Well, we can splice in. I'm sorry. You'll have to edit this. But
that's okay.
I would say, if there's one more thing I can tell the audience, if you are following me previously on Twitter, X, I know that some people lost touch with me because I left that platform a couple of years ago. I am still very, very active on social media. I'm active on LinkedIn, but I'm most active on Mastodon and Blue Sky. I also am on Threads. I cross-post there. So if you were following me before and you'd like to be in touch outside of my blog, you are more than welcome to follow me on one of those alternative social media sources. I post quite a bit still, and I like to have conversations with people, answer questions, and that's also how you get in touch with me for mentorship. I have a Calendly up on those sites where you can sign up for sessions with me.
And we'll be sharing in the show notes your social media accounts so people can find you.
That sounds super. I'm Hacks4Pancakes on pretty much everything.
Well, thanks for joining. It was great chatting with you, and I appreciate you being a guest on my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Phillip Wylie Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Phillip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter at Phillip Wylie. Until next time.